everyone, welcome back to another video here on Nace. In June 2023, my wife and I were in the market for a new car. Now, given our specific set of requirements, we narrowed down that list to two cars, the VW T-Cross and the Chery Tiggo 4 Pro. Then we are faced with a dilemma. Do you go with an old and established brand or a relatively new one? But then I thought to myself, technically Chery isn't new. They were here before. And we all know how that went. But seeing how positively the car was received by our local motoring journalists, I was very optimistic. But what I wanted to know was what the car was going to be like here at home in South Africa after 6 months of ownership, after 12 months of ownership. I wanted to know how reliable the engine is going to be, and are any of the interior trim bits going to fall apart. Now, despite me not having that video, we actually pulled the trigger and bought the car, and today I am making that very video. So it's time to get up close and personal with the Chery Tiggo 4 Pro. After living with a car for more than 12 months, you do get to notice a few things. I'm going to get into that later in the video. One of my requirements was getting a decent amount of service and maintenance plan, which it does come with. But what stood out to me was, when you're the original owner of the car, you qualify for the 10-year, 1 million kilometer engine cover. Now, in order for you to keep that active, you have to service your car as per normal through a Chery dealership. And they do make this process a lot easier by providing you with a document of what is actually covered. But of course, I've lost that document. Now, putting losing documents aside, I consider myself to be a bit of a petrol head. You see, you can almost forgive a sports car for not having certain features like a reverse cam or climate control, as long as it drives very well. But when I'm looking for a car in this segment, I become very demanding. I want it all. And just to give you a bit of context, this was going to be my wife's daily driver. So just to go through some of those requirements, because it was quite a lot, we needed a car that was going to be roughly the same sort of size as a B-segment hatchback. My wife works in an incredibly narrow area. You know, there are cyclists, people running around to get coffee, there's traffic, and when you get into the underground car park, it gets even more narrower. So I didn't want her to think too much about the dimensions of the vehicle. I wanted it to be easy to live with, easy to park. We also needed a car that was going to have a slightly raised suspension. One of the doggy daycares we were at was 500 meters off road. Also wanted a car that's going to have a lot of tech. Also wanted a car that's going to give me the best value for money. And I think we achieved that here. When I think about it, this was the only car that ticked almost all of the boxes that we had. There was just one box that it couldn't tick. And I'll get to that unticked box later in the video. But overall, this car was by far the best choice. No other car came close to this in terms of the price that we paid and also meeting all of our requirements. So let's talk about the engine. The model that we selected was called the New Elite SE. I'm not sure what it's called now, but basically that was a top of the range model at the time. And that comes with a 1.5 liter turbocharged engine with 108 kilowatts and 210 newton meters of torque. Now, this engine is quite a pleasant one. It actually feels a lot more powerful than it actually is. And I think what makes this whole experience so nice is that the gearbox that they got mated with the engine, it's actually a CVT gearbox, but it's a CVT gearbox unlike anything else I've felt before or driven. It almost feels like a double clutch gearbox. It's very smooth. It almost knows what gear to be in, like a double clutch gearbox. And it puts the power down very well. I mean, when you set off at a set of traffic lights, you feel the acceleration. And I think it's also because they put the torque band a lot more earlier in the rev range. But overall, the drivability of this car is a positive one. Quite happy with it. In the past 12 months, there hasn't been any issues with the engine. However, I should say that upon taking delivery of the car, we took it on its first trip, a 30-minute drive. When we reached our destination, I saw the engine bay smoking, but thankfully it wasn't a big issue. It was actually this particular bottle that was smoking, and I think maybe it was because the car was so new, it hadn't had a chance to be run in terms of the fluids and the oil running into all the tubing. And doing a little bit of research, some people had this issue, some people did not. So I think it comes down to the delivery mileage. So let's pull over and talk about the features and the technology, and also what the interior is like over the past 12 months. Now, I must admit, I was quite worried about how reliable the tech was going to be, because there is just so much of it in this car. And after 12 months, everything works reasonably well. However, there are a few caveats to mention. You can't just start the car, put it in drive, and set off and expect things like the AVM system to work. If you do that, the Chery's personal assistant will come on full volume and say things like, "I'm having a bit of trouble," or "things aren't working as expected." Interesting choice of words though. However, you can get around this issue if you just start your car and wait for a minute or two. Or if you have the remote start feature, you can start your car remotely. By the time you get to your car, the car should have had time to wake up, warm up, and everything should work as normal. I also thought that some of these features that the car comes with was a gimmick, but it actually proved to be quite useful. For example, the Chery's personal assistant. If you're driving long distances at night especially, and you don't want to take your hands off the wheel and you don't want to take your eyes off the road, you can just speak to the car and ask it to warm the car up or turn the AC down, and you're not taking your eyes off the road. So I don't think that's a bad idea. And also things like closing the window, I mean, you can literally do that, but again, if you don't want to take your hands off the wheel, you can ask the car to do that for you, and the response time isn't too bad. But my favorite feature by far is the AVM system. Now, this speaks to one of the requirements that we had, because my wife works in that narrow space. And it's so useful because not only does it help you park, but especially when you're driving under 25 kilometers an hour, it can tell you whether you're going to curb or wheel or not. And it's actually quite surprising how clear the picture is, the image quality coming through, especially at night. You can clearly see where the curb is, where the pillars are, and you avoid an expensive bill. The only issue I have though with the AVM system is that I find that it sort of switches off when you're halfway through your parking. And I think that's when you need it the most, just to make sure you're in between the lines or if you're going to hit something. Now, I do think that they could fix that maybe with a software update, just making it stay on a lot longer. But you can just flick the switch and the AVM system will come back online. It's such a useful feature, to be honest. I mean, it even comes on when you don't even indicate. The catering for the BMW drivers. So, has any of the interior trim bits fallen off? No. Everything feels solid. I mean, there's nothing moving in here. The soft leather is still just as good. There's no sign of wear or tear. It's only been just over 12 months. But yeah, I'm quite impressed with it. There's no rattles in the car, although I did see, after doing some research, there were some people that had a rattle, but I think it was bolts in the back that just needed to be tightened. We don't have that issue in our car, but yeah, everything still feels quite good. I was also quite impressed with the back, because I have two beagles and they think that this car is the size of a football pitch. There's no sign of any tear in the leather, and they often come back very dirty from daycare or their park adventures, sometimes wet, covered in mud, and it hasn't stained the seats. I mean, obviously you will see it being messed with mud, but after doing some light cleaning, it looks just as good as new. Or if it gets a bit more hectic, you can take it to the car wash. There's no signs that there was a beagle in there. I did notice a few issues with the Android Auto. We use a wired connection, but I also have a device that makes that process wireless. Despite which method we use, we get the same sort of outcome every now and again. So what it does is it displays this error message when you're driving. So I think the car thinks that we are making too many inputs and it's sort of like a safety feature. But to be honest, as soon as we get into the car, we set our Spotify and that's it. We're not really making a lot of entries in here, and it happens after 10 minutes of driving. Now, I mean, you can just disconnect the cable and connect it again, and it does go away. But it can be quite frustrating at times. Again, maybe that's a software issue that could be resolved. Now, time to address the elephant in the car. Not that one. The fuel consumption. Look, it's not great, if I'm honest. I think it can be better looking at the other rivals in this segment. When we bought the car, the majority of our 12 months, our consumption was sitting in the high end of 12 liters per 100 Ks, sometimes touching 13 liters per 100 Ks. I do think that that's very heavy, and for some people that could be a deal breaker. But for us, this was the only car that ticked almost all of the boxes, and that's just the one that it didn't tick, as I mentioned earlier in the video, and we were willing to live with it, looking at the distance that we travel to work and so forth. But that could really be a deal breaker for other people. I do think it can get better. After the car had its first service, it has dropped to about 10.9, 11 liters per 100 Ks. I am really hoping that it could get a lot better. When we inquired about the car at Chery Tiggo, South Africa, it was a very positive experience. It was quite refreshing to see how knowledgeable the staff were on their products. When you buy this car brand new, they're actually half full of oil, and at 5,000 kilometers you have to take it into the dealership so they can drain the oil and top it up with new oil. And when we had to take the car in for its first service, on both occasions our visit to the dealership was a very pleasant one. We were met at the roadside by the Chery staff and greeted by our names. It's little gestures like that that make the ownership quite special. Now this may seem trivial, but I actually have owned quite a number of cars at this point in time, and I never had to change a brake light bulb before within 1.5 years of ownership. This did not sit well with me, to be honest. Despite the niggles I mentioned earlier, this car is fun to drive, it's comfortable, and it has a lot of features, which makes it feel luxurious. This is an ownership from my perspective. I'm not sure what the car is like for everyone else, but for the few people that I recommended the car to, they seem to be pretty happy with it still. So we now reached the end of the video. If you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. But as always, you have yourself a nice day, and I'll catch you in the next one.